There's a brutal truth that almost no one dares to admit. Most people have never truly lived. They've only survived emotionally, trying not to displease anyone. They've spent years silently asking permission to exist, permission to speak, to grow, to earn money, to change, to be who they truly are. And the worst part? They called it humility. But Machiavelli understood something the modern world tries to hide from you. Weak men are easier to control. That's why society rewards emotional obedience, the need for approval, and the fear of bothering others so much. From a young age, you've been taught to diminish your ambition, soften your presence, and accept less than you deserve. Because a man aware of his own worth becomes unpredictable, and unpredictable people frighten entire systems. Perhaps you realize this the hard way, through betrayal, through silent humiliation, through unexpected abandonment. Or maybe you've reached that point where you wake up tired, look at your own life, and feel that something inside you has been suffocating for years. Because there comes a time when pretending starts to hurt more than changing. And that's exactly where it all begins. Not when the world accepts you, but when you finally stop begging for acceptance. In this video, you'll understand why some people can never be emotionally destroyed, even after losing relationships, money, status, or support. You'll understand how strong men build a presence that doesn't depend on external validation. And most importantly, you'll realize that true power has never been in the hands of others. It has always been hidden behind the character you created to survive. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. There's a silent moment in a man's life when he realizes an uncomfortable truth. Almost everything he does is a desperate attempt to be accepted. He changes the way he speaks, depending on who's listening, softens his opinions to avoid friction, laughs at things he doesn't even find funny, and gradually begins to live like a weary actor in his own skin. The problem is that no one notices when this starts. Social programming comes early, almost invisibly, teaching that being loved is worth more than being respected. And that's where the most dangerous addiction of all is born: emotional dependence on the approval of others. Machiavelli understood something that few people accept today. It is better to be feared than loved, because those who need too much of others' love end up becoming manipulable. The man who lives begging for validation never builds real power, only an appearance of security. And the worst part? He believes he's being humble, when in reality he's only training his own submission. That's why so many enter a room already worried about what others will think of them, while the truly strong enter concerned only with clarity and direction. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. That was the logic. Real human nature doesn't reward those who negate themselves. It only consumes people who are too available. And the more someone needs approval, the more value they lose in the eyes of the world. The awakening begins when he understands that living trying to please others is an elegant way of emotionally begging. It sounds harsh, but that's exactly how it works. A man who asks permission to exist surrenders his own destiny into the hands of others. Consider a simple example: that intelligent guy who never posts his projects because he fears criticism, or the talented woman who constantly downplays her achievements so as not to bother insecure friends. Little by little, the person becomes small enough to fit into small spaces. And the world loves this because people without self-awareness are easy to control. Machiavelli would call this a lack of virtù, the inability to assume one's own power in the face of circumstances. Life begins to change when someone realizes that they don't need to convince everyone. They only need to become internally solid. This requires silence, observation, and a certain emotional detachment from external opinions. A simple exercise already begins to reveal this. Spend an entire day without justifying your decisions to anyone, without over-explaining, without apologizing for existing. It seems small, but it reveals a deep vice, because those who live trying to be understood by everyone end up never understanding themselves, and that's exactly where another layer of the prison begins to appear. The invisible programming that was installed early on, without him realizing it. From childhood, he was trained to believe that wanting too much was dangerous. They told him that ambition was arrogance, that wanting too much money corrupted, that dreaming too big alienated people. So he learned to diminish himself before the world even tried to diminish him. This is the cruelest detail of social programming. It installs invisible limits and then convinces the person that this is humility. Machiavelli understood that most social rules were not created to liberate strong men, but to maintain stability and predictability. A man fully aware of his own worth becomes difficult to control. That's why so many grow up hearing phrases like, "Don't try to show off, accept what comes, be realistic." But almost always, this realism is just fear disguised as maturity, and without realizing it, he begins to negotiate his own dreams to continue being accepted. He works below his capacity, tolerates mediocre relationships, accepts humiliating salaries, and even thanks them for the opportunity. The end justifies the means. But the problem is that many people don't even choose a worthy end. They live merely surviving emotionally. The appearance of virtue becomes more important than building a powerful life. And while he tries to appear as a good person, others quietly learn to occupy space, command environments, and shape people's perceptions through the calculated use of emotional and psychological force. The most dangerous thing about this lie is that it rarely feels like a prison. On the contrary, it's often accompanied by applause. People praise those who sacrifice too much, who accept less than they deserve, who are always available. But there's a brutal difference between kindness and a lack of boundaries. A man without clear limits becomes an emotional resource for others, and society loves useful people as long as they don't become too powerful. Look at how many extremely capable individuals spend years trapped in small environments because they're afraid of being judged when they grow up. The person wants to start a business, but fears disappointing their family. They want to move to another city, but feel guilty. They want to charge more for their work, but feel greedy. Little by little, they learn to amputate their own desires to continue belonging. Machiavelli spoke about decisions based on real human nature, not moral fantasies, and the reality is simple. The world respects those who assert value without asking permission. A powerful exercise begins here. Write down on paper everything you truly want from life, without moral censorship, without seeming humble, without trying to sound acceptable. That's the truth, because many have never done it honestly, and when they finally do, they realize something disturbing. They weren't living their own lives, they were just playing a character created to please others. But there comes a point when that mask begins to crack irreversibly. Almost every man awakens after a rupture. Rarely is it through peace. Usually it's a betrayal, a silent humiliation, a financial loss, abandonment, or that existential weariness that makes a person stare at the ceiling in the early morning and realize that something inside them died a long time ago. This is the point that separates ordinary men from those who begin to develop real power, because some use pain as an excuse to crumble, while others use it as an activation. Machiavelli deeply understood the role of adversity in the construction of virtue. Fortune changes the scenario, but it is the reaction to chaos that reveals who someone really is. And the curious thing is that the moment of rupture almost always starts small. A conversation that hurts more than it should. A disguised contempt. A day when he realizes he was available to people who would never be available to him. The penny drops slowly, and when it does, it hurts. Because he understands that he spent years trying to preserve relationships, environments, and versions of himself that were already dead. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that some pains don't appear to destroy anyone. They appear to interrupt a lie, and it is precisely at that moment that many begin to abandon the need for approval. Not because of immediate spiritual evolution, but because of exhaustion. The man, tired of emotionally begging, finally begins to see. There's something almost cruel about breaking points. They reveal who was only by your side while you were useful. That's why so many people change radically after a loss. Not because they suddenly became cold, but because they saw real human nature without makeup. A bankrupt businessman discovers who truly believed in him. An abandoned man realizes how many times he ignored clear signs for fear of loneliness. A betrayed woman understands that she spent years sacrificing her own intuition to maintain a facade of stability, and at that moment, a silent choice arises. Either the person uses the pain to become bitter, or they use it to build clarity. Machiavelli spoke of constant adaptability. The intelligent man doesn't deny emotional reality, but neither does he allow it to destroy him. He observes, learns, and recalibrates. A powerful exercise begins right here. Stop asking, "Why did they do this to me?" and start asking, "What did this situation reveal that I refused to see?" This simple shift destroys the victim mentality. And when someone abandons the victim posture, they begin to regain power. Gradually, he learns something uncomfortable. It wasn't a lack of ability that held him back. It was excessive attachment. Attachment to validation, attachment to past versions of himself, attachment to the fear of losing people. And when that begins to die within him, a new structure begins to silently emerge, cold, strategic, and almost impossible to shake. After he overcomes the pain and begins to see reality without emotional anesthesia, an inevitable question arises. How does someone become impossible to manipulate? And the answer lies not in physical strength, money, or appearance. It lies in the silent construction of an internal structure that few people can access. Machiavelli understood this better than almost any other thinker. True power is rarely noisy. It is calculated. It observes before acting. And this architecture begins with the first pillar, calculated silence. The weak man feels the need to react to everything. He over-explains, responds too quickly, tries to correct the perception of everyone around him. The strong man, on the other hand, understands that impulsive reactions give away free emotional information. And emotional information is ammunition in the wrong hands. It's better to be feared than loved, not because he becomes cruel, but because he ceases to be predictable. Imagine someone who receives a public provocation and simply smiles, observes, and keeps walking. This disarms more than any shout. Silence, when used well, creates psychological discomfort in those who expected emotional control over you. And few realize this early on. Because the world teaches us to respond instantly, to justify everything, to live emotionally available. But those who talk too much reveal too many weaknesses. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. And in reality, those who master their own silence begin to dominate environments without needing to beg for attention. The second, third, and fourth pillars emerge almost as a natural consequence: selectivity, detachment, and clear vision. Selectivity changes everything because it finally understands that access to one's emotional energy should be a privilege, not an automatic right. A person who gives themselves completely to any environment quickly loses psychological value. This is why strong people carefully choose friendships, relationships, and even conversations. Their own loyal armies. Machiavelli knew that surrounding oneself with the wrong people destroys any empire, including the inner one. Detachment creates a frightening freedom, because those who don't have an exaggerated fear of losing people, opportunities, or status become difficult to control. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means stopping negotiating principles for fear of abandonment. And then comes the fourth pillar, clear vision, perhaps the rarest of all. The ability to see the intentions behind words, perceive patterns before they explode, and accept real human nature without romanticization. A simple example: observing who only appears when they need something, who disappears when you grow, or who changes completely when they realize they've lost emotional influence over you. The awakened man learns to notice micro-behaviors, small manipulations, small tests, small acts of disrespect. Because great destructions almost always begin with ignored details. And when this clarity begins to grow, he realizes something unsettling. There are people who will not accept his transformation in silence. On the contrary, some will slowly begin to try to dismantle him piece by piece. When a man begins to abandon the need for approval, something curious happens. Some people around him begin to feel threatened. Not because he has done something against them, but because a strong presence reveals hidden weaknesses. This is where many discover an uncomfortable truth about real human nature. Not everyone wants to see you grow. Some preferred the old version, more insecure, more available, easier to control, and they will rarely attack directly. Strategically dangerous people almost never enter through the front door. Machiavelli understood this perfectly through the calculated use of force and indirect manipulation. The first method is the erosion of small things, small comments, small ironies, small devaluations disguised as jokes. You've changed too much. Are you getting cocky now? Wow, you've become cold. It seems harmless, but the psychological objective is simple: to make him feel guilty for evolving, because emotional guilt weakens decisions. And the more someone tries to grow while keeping everyone comfortable, the slower they become. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that some people benefited emotionally from his insecurity. The man who begins to develop clarity notices it in the details. The friend who laughs at his plans, the partner who devalues his ambitions, the family that treats his dreams as arrogance. And if he doesn't realize it early, he will begin to dim his own light just to preserve relationships that have been emotionally rotten for a long time. The second method is even more silent: the isolation of your confidence. Manipulative people slowly try to make you doubt your own perception. They invalidate your intuition, minimize your achievements, and create an environment where you begin to question even what you feel. This happens a lot in relationships, friendships, and even professional environments. A boss who never acknowledges your results, a partner who turns every conversation into an attempt to make you seem exaggerated. Little by little, the person loses connection with themselves. Machiavelli spoke about the appearance of virtue. Many present themselves as concerned about you, when in reality, they are only trying to regain psychological control. And then comes the third method, The withdrawal of validation, perhaps the most powerful of all. When they realize that you no longer react as before, some people deliberately withdraw attention, affection, and recognition, hoping that you will come running back to regain approval. And this is where almost everyone fails, because the emotional addiction to validation is deep. The strong man, however, learns something essential. Silence is also a test. Distance also communicates. Absence also reveals intentions. A brutally effective exercise begins here. Observe who changes their behavior when they realize they can no longer control their emotions. This reveals more about someone than 1,000 conversations. It's better to be feared than loved, because a man who doesn't desperately depend on the approval of others becomes impossible to manipulate easily. And when he finally understands this, a new skill begins to emerge. The ability to define himself without asking the world for permission. There comes a moment when he realizes he's spent his entire life allowing others to define who he is. His family dictated what success was. His friends decided what was normal. His relationships shaped even how he spoke, thought, and dreamed. And the scariest thing is that this happens so slowly that most people never notice. A man begins to abandon parts of himself to avoid conflict, to maintain belonging, to continue being accepted, until one day he looks at his own life and feels a strange sense of emptiness, as if he were living someone else's biography. Machiavelli understood that power begins with the ability to take control of one's own narrative. Those who don't define themselves will be defined by their environment, and mediocre environments almost always try to diminish any sign of greatness. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is simple. The world respects people who know exactly who they are. Not because they never feel fear, but because they don't negotiate identity for approval. The awakened man begins to realize that inner clarity is more powerful than charisma, because charisma without identity becomes acting, and constant acting tires the soul. That's why some individuals seem strong even in silence. They're not trying to convince anyone. They've simply decided to stop asking for permission to exist. The cold power of self-definition appears when one learns to say internally, "I decide who I am." No excuses, no need for collective consensus, without over-explaining each choice. This completely changes someone's posture. The person who previously justified themselves all the time begins to respond less. The one who begged for understanding learns to accept that they will be misinterpreted by some people. And that's okay. Machiavelli spoke of constant adaptability, but adaptation does not mean loss of identity. It means adjusting strategy without abandoning essence. Consider a clear example. Someone decides to radically change their habits, starts training, studying, earning money, positioning themselves better, and immediately criticism arises. They're different. They're arrogant. Now they think they're better than others. Indeed, the psychological objective of these phrases is simple, to push them back to the old version, and many return, not for lack of ability, but because enduring the social discomfort of transformation requires emotional courage. A powerful exercise begins here. Stop announcing changes and start incorporating them silently, without over-promising, without explaining plans to everyone. Your own loyal armies, even your goals, need to be protected from emotionally sabotaging environments. Because not every opinion deserves access to your mind. And when someone finally learns to define themselves without asking permission, they discover another uncomfortable truth. Their presence begins to gain weight precisely when their availability begins to diminish. Few people understand the psychological power of absence. We live in a time when everyone is accessible all the time, responding to messages in seconds, giving free attention, over-explaining, over-appearing, and becoming too predictable. And predictability destroys value. Machiavelli deeply understood this when he spoke about controlling perception and the strategic use of presence. The man who is always available communicates, without realizing it, that he is afraid of losing ground. The one who knows how to deliberately withdraw creates something rare, psychological weight. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that the world values what it cannot access all the time. Look at how people treat someone who is constantly chasing attention compared to someone who appears infrequently, speaks precisely, and doesn't seem emotionally dependent on anyone. The latter naturally arouses curiosity, respect, and even discomfort. Because absence, when used well, forces others to confront their own lack of control, and that scares many people. The awakened man begins to understand that not every battle needs an immediate response. Not every provocation deserves a reaction. Not every message requires instant availability. It's better to be feared than loved, because those who aren't emotionally available all the time become harder to manipulate. And the curious thing is, the more he learns to conserve energy, the more he realizes how many people only valued his presence because they had unlimited access to it. Deliberate withdrawal isn't childish emotional games. It's psychological repositioning. There's a stark difference between disappearing out of pride and stepping away for clarity. A strong man doesn't use silence to punish. He uses silence to protect direction, focus, and emotional stability. Machiavelli spoke of the calculated use of force, and sometimes the most powerful force is simply not chasing after anything. A simple example perfectly illustrates this. The person who stops trying to convince everyone of their own worth and begins to silently focus on their own personal development, without posting every move, without announcing goals, without begging for recognition. Gradually, people's perception changes, because constant presence trivializes impact. Strategic absence, on the other hand, creates emotional recalibration, and this applies to friendships, relationships, and even professional environments. How many times has someone only realized your value after losing access to your energy? How many times have you been treated as indispensable only when you stopped being available all the time? Your own loyal armies, even your attention needs to be distributed judiciously. A powerful exercise begins here. Spend a few days without initiating unnecessary conversations, without seeking digital validation, and without chasing after those who clearly offer emotional crumbs. Observe who only seeks you out when they miss you, and who never lifts a finger when they lose access to your presence. This observation quickly shatters illusions, because the man who learns to use his own absence stops begging for attention and finally begins to build something far more dangerous: inner presence. After enduring so many illusions, manipulations, and internal ruptures, he finally begins to understand that true power isn't about appearing strong, it's about becoming internally coherent. And that changes everything, because most people live in a war with themselves. They say one thing and do another. They want respect, but disrespect themselves daily. They want peace, but feed emotional chaos all the time. The man who should emerge after this awakening is different. He is not perfect. He is not cold all the time. He is not a flawless emotional machine, but he develops something rare: inner alignment. Machiavelli understood that decisions based on real human nature require emotional mastery, not emotional suppression. The weak man explodes or implodes. The strong man observes, processes, decides. There is a brutal difference between controlling emotions and pretending they don't exist. A man dominated by anger destroys himself. A man dominated by neediness gives in. A man dominated by fear accepts any mediocre life as long as he feels safe. And that is precisely why so many live imprisoned in routines they hate. Better to be feared than loved, even by oneself. Because when someone begins to develop emotional discipline, they start to trust in their own ability to overcome difficulties without collapsing internally. And this quiet confidence completely changes how they interact with the world. The man he must become possesses a clear purpose and a carefully selected circle of friends. This seems simple, but it changes entire destinies. Most people destroy their own future trying to maintain proximity to people incompatible with the life they wish to build. Machiavelli spoke of having one's own loyal armies because he understood that no empire survives surrounded by weak, envious, or disorganized allies. And the same applies to the human mind. An awakened man begins to better select who enters his routine, who influences his thoughts, and who deserves access to his vulnerabilities. This means saying no more often. It means stopping frequenting environments that drain emotional energy. It means choosing growth, even when it requires temporary solitude. Here's a practical example: exchanging hours of empty distraction for strategic reading of books like The 48 Laws of Power, Think and Grow Rich, or Meditations. Starting to take care of the body not only for aesthetics, but for the mental discipline it develops. Learning a valuable skill while others waste years just complaining about life. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The strong man understands that purpose is not born from motivation, it is born from the daily repetition of difficult choices. And as this internal structure begins to solidify, a heavy truth slowly emerges before him. Discovering one's own worth has a cost that almost no one is prepared to pay. Almost everyone talks about power, self-esteem, and self-confidence, but few talk about the psychological price that comes with it. Because discovering one's own worth doesn't just transform how a person sees themselves, it also transforms how they perceive the world. And that can be painful. The first cost is loneliness. Not the empty loneliness of being without company, but the silent loneliness of realizing that one can no longer connect deeply with environments, conversations, and people that once seemed sufficient. Machiavelli understood that men guided by clarity would inevitably distance themselves from the common mentality. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that growth creates distance, and many revert to being small just to regain emotional belonging. The awakened man begins to perceive patterns he previously ignored. Friendships based on convenience, relationships sustained by neediness, and entire environments functioning through emotional manipulation disguised as affection. And once someone sees this clearly, it's impossible to unsee it. Better to be feared than loved, because the man who stops begging for connection becomes less manipulable. But there's a price to pay. Some people will call your clarity of vision arrogance. Others will say you've changed. Some will simply disappear when they realize they can no longer control your emotional perception as before. And it is precisely here that many weaken because they confuse loss of access with loss of love. The second and third costs are even more difficult: being misunderstood and taking full responsibility for one's own life. When one stops living seeking approval, one will inevitably be judged by those who still depend on it. Some will say he has become cold. Others will call his selectivity selfishness. But the truth is deeper. People accustomed to his emotionally available version almost always become bothered when he develops clear boundaries. Machiavelli spoke of the appearance of virtue because he understood that the world often prefers docile people to conscious people. And then comes the last price, perhaps the most brutal of all. There will no longer be anyone to blame. The awakened man realizes that his life begins to directly reflect his choices, his discipline, his courage, and his omission. This is frightening because it eliminates the comfortable fantasy of waiting for external rescue. A powerful exercise begins here, observing all areas of one's own life and honestly asking, what in this was a direct consequence of my decisions? No victimhood, no sophisticated excuses, no emotional outsourcing. Your own loyal armies, even your mind needs to learn to obey your direction, not your impulses. And when someone finally accepts full responsibility for their own existence, something almost irreversible happens. They stop waiting for the world to recognize their worth because they begin to silently carry it within themselves. And it is precisely at this point that a final understanding is born, cold and liberating at the same time. In the end, he realizes a truth that frightens almost everyone. No one can destroy a man who has clearly decided what he is made of. They can attack his reputation, they can distort his intentions, they can try to diminish his confidence, withdraw support, validate other people in front of him, and even silently root for his downfall. But none of that really works when someone has built a solid identity internally. Machiavelli understood this with surgical precision. True power has never depended entirely on external circumstances, but on the ability to remain firm in the face of them. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. The reality is that the world will always test those who begin to awaken. Some people will try to make you doubt yourself. Others will provoke you emotionally just to see if you can still control your reactions. And there will be times when life will seem unfair, silent, and brutal. But the awakened man learns something essential. It is not the absence of pain that creates strength. It is the ability not to abandon oneself during it. Better to be feared than loved, even by one's own inner fears, because when someone stops running from themselves, they begin to become dangerously free, free from the need to please, free from the exaggerated fear of rejection, free from the emotional enslavement of constant validation. And an emotionally free man becomes almost impossible to manipulate. The great turning point happens when he understands that power is not something given by the world. It doesn't come through applause, titles, followers, money, or collective approval. All of that can disappear. True power is claimed internally. It's the silent decision to no longer betray oneself, to no longer dim one's own light to fit into small spaces, to no longer negotiate principles for emotional crumbs. Machiavelli spoke of virtù and fortuna because he understood that life constantly changes. But strong men learn to remain centered even amidst chaos. And this requires constant adaptability. The man you become after this awakening is no longer naive, but neither is he empty. He learns to observe more, react less, and build silently. A final exercise summarizes all this. Sit alone for a few minutes and honestly ask yourself, who would I be if I weren't afraid of others' opinions? This question quickly destroys masks, because many have never truly lived their own lives. They have only survived emotionally within the expectations of others. And when someone finally breaks through that, something changes in their posture, their gaze, and even the energy they transmit. People feel it. Not because he tries to prove his strength, but because he has stopped begging permission to exist. The end justifies the means, and perhaps the greatest end of all is to reclaim one's own soul before the world completely transforms it into something unrecognizable. Now you understand why so many people spend their entire lives feeling empty, even while trying to please everyone. Because no man finds peace while continuing to abandon himself in order to be accepted. The world will continue trying to mold you, reduce your ambition, test your emotional limits, and transform your authenticity into guilt. This will never stop. The real question is, how long will you continue surrendering your identity into the hands of others? Machiavelli understood that strong men are not born ready. They are forged when they decide to face reality without emotional anesthesia. And perhaps this is the most important moment of your life, realizing that the power you sought outside was always waiting for an internal decision from you. So observe your life with brutal honesty. Who have you become just to be accepted? How many times have you silenced your truth to avoid rejection? How many dreams have you abandoned because you were afraid of people's judgment? And above all, who could you become if you finally stopped asking permission to exist? Because no one can destroy a man who has stopped betraying himself. No one manipulates someone who no longer desperately depends on validation. No one controls someone who clearly knows their own worth. But this transformation requires courage. It requires abandoning old versions of yourself. It requires accepting that some people will walk away when they realize they can no longer control your mind. And perhaps that is precisely the price of emotional freedom. Now I want to know from you, what was the most uncomfortable part of this video? At what point did you realize you were living more to please others than to build your own life? Write it in the comments. Because sometimes the truth that hurts the most is precisely the one that sets you free the most. And if you want to continue learning about psychological power, human nature, Machiavelli, and building emotional strength in the modern world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because from now on, you'll start to see things that most people go their whole lives without noticing.